Recently, popular atheist Dr. Richard Dawkins reminding Christians of one of the best ways to defend our faith. This video was so good and funny, I don't even need to say anything in this video. Let's see how fast you can figure it out. Just leave a timestamp in the comment section below once you catch it. Let the challenge begin.
Thank you. Well, I would hope not, because you're back on the programme and it's great to have you and I love talking to you. Let's talk about this issue of God, because we had a long chat about this last time. I do believe, for what it's worth, I do believe in God. I do believe in an afterlife. I find it comforting. I also find, as I said to you last time, I find it explains things which are otherwise completely inexplicable. And we had a guest on recently, Professor Stephen C. Meyer, who's a prominent believer in intelligent design, or what he calls the God hypothesis. He watched our last interview that you and I had, and this is what he said about it.
Dawkins wants to portray theistic belief as if it's equivalent to belief in fairies, and he'll concede that, well, it's possible. But I think there's a stronger argument for the theistic case. And that is that when scientists and philosophers reason from evidence, they typically use a method of reasoning that has a technical name. It's called inferring to the best explanation, where the best explanation is one where you're invoking a cause which has the kind of powers that would be required to explain the phenomenon of interest. And you correctly pointed out in your conversation with him that when you get back to that, what physicists often call the singularity, the point where matter, space, time, and energy begin to exist, the materialist is really up against a huge conundrum, because prior to the origin of matter, there is no matter to do the causing. That's what we mean by the origin of matter, that's where it starts. Right. And so if you want to invoke a cause which is sufficient to explain the origin of matter, you can't invoke matter. It's in principle, the materialistic explanations are in principle insufficient. So you need to invoke something which is external to the material universe and is not bounded by time and space as well. And that starts to paint a picture of the kind of cause you would need that has the sort of attributes the traditional theists have traditionally associated with God.
Now, you see, Richard Dawkins, this is the nub of, I think, my whole issue with your position on this. And you can respond, obviously, to what you just heard in a moment. But given your new book is about the genetic book of the dead, and it effectively takes us from here to in perpetuity on a genetic trail where each part of existence feeds the next and so on. And I totally subscribe to that. The genome of every body and every organization and so on creates, as you say, a comprehensive dossier on all the world as it moves forward. I get it. But when you go back to the very start, what is there before that? And that, I think I asked you last time, and Professor Meyer brought that up again as being the flaw in your position, which is what is there before it starts? What is nothing?
This is a question for a physicist, not a biologist, but what I would answer to Professor Meyer is that we need to explain complexity in terms of simplicity. And of course it's true that I cannot say what was there before the Big Bang. Physicists sometimes tell us that the word before doesn't even mean anything before the Big Bang. But whatever it was,
but it has to, doesn't it?
You cannot suddenly invoke...
Doesn't it have to? I mean, someone as logical as you are, and I believe you are, you know, you think about this all very logically. A logical mind surely has to appreciate that before the Big Bang, there has to have been something before then. Otherwise, what is nothing?
A physicist will tell you that
yeah, but what do you tell me?
I'm trying to tell you what a physicist would say first of all. They would say that you cannot use the word before for the Big Bang. Time began at the Big Bang. There was no before the Big Bang. I know it's contrary to common sense. Physicists don't necessarily deal with common sense.
Well, it makes no sense, does it? And that's what I mean. I think you're a logical man. That cannot make sense to you. The idea that you're not even allowed to use the word before the Big Bang, when every part of both of our brains tells us that that's obviously nonsensical, doesn't that make you think again?
We are not physicists. I, like you, am completely baffled by what physicists say to me, which is that you cannot use the word before for before the Big Bang. Time itself began at the Big Bang. Now, that is totally counterintuitive. It's counterintuitive to me, it's counterintuitive to you, it's counterintuitive to Stephen Meyer, but we are not physicists. And you need to talk to a physicist. Talk to a physicist about that. And they will tell you that you cannot use the word before for the Big Bang.
Yeah, but you think that's as preposterous as I do.
I do, because I'm not a physicist.
You've just written a book as a biologist called The Genetic Book of the Dead, in which you talk about the body and the genome, comprehensive dossiers and so on. So you're prepared to expound a philosophy based on that as a biologist, which I completely respect, and it makes perfect sense. The book makes perfect sense the way that you have written it. But why would you then think that a physicist cannot be contradicted just simply because they're a physicist? I could contradict what you say as a biologist.
No, you really aren't getting it. I'm so sorry. Modern physics is exceedingly mysterious. It really is. I mean, have you tried to read some of the difficult modern physics books? It really is very difficult to understand. And intuition doesn't do it. You cannot use human intuition. Human intuition was built up by evolution over many millions of years to survive on the African plain, hunting and gathering, looking for waterholes, looking for mates and so on. Our brains were not built to understand the profundities of the origin of the universe, the end of the universe, the kind of things that physicists deal with. I think it's actually amazing that at least some human brains are capable of dealing with this kind of stuff. My brain isn't, and nor is yours.
No, but that's my point, though.
I wish it were.
Well, yeah, I wish both our brains could. But the truth is, it's because the human brain can't comprehend this, including, I don't think, any physicist. Because the moment they say you can't have before the Big Bang, they lose me completely just on a common sense perspective. It's that reason that I think there has to be a power that is greater than the human brain. And that gives me succor to my belief in God, and why I think people turn to gods of different types, obviously. They turn to that because it is incomprehensible otherwise what has happened here.
There has to be something more difficult to understand than the human brain can understand. I accept that. But it doesn't have to be God. It doesn't have to be the kind of God who, I don't know, forgives sins and listens to prayers and things like that. There is something very mysterious, and I don't understand it, and you don't understand it, and maybe we never will. I think it's not clear whether physicists understand it. Some do, some don't, but it's obviously going to be very mysterious. But God is not that interesting mystery. God is just a personification of human desires, a father figure, something like that, somebody who looks after you. You said at the beginning that it was comforting for you. A God is somebody who listens to prayers, who forgives sins, who takes action for the benefit of humanity or not, as the case may be. We're not talking about that now. We're talking about deeply, deeply mysterious, profound things, which physics is working on, and it's very difficult to understand. And the fact that you don't understand it and I don't understand it is not good grounds for suddenly invoking a supernatural sky daddy.
But if our genomes, if our genetic background has all the information which has led to us being what we are today, and that will obviously extrapolate as we go forward, then it does beg the question, doesn't it? Where does the original information come from?
Yes, it does, and as far as a biologist is concerned, we're talking about the original information coming at the origin of life, and that's something which biologists and chemists and physicists can deal with. But you've gone right back to the origin of the universe, to the Big Bang, which is another matter entirely, and which is not really relevant to the biological question of what happens once biology gets started, which is the origin of genetics, actually. It's the origin of the information which is passed from generation to generation, from living creature to living creature. That started maybe 3.8, maybe 4 billion years ago. The universe started more like 13.8 billion years ago, which is a much longer time ago, and which is a totally different question, nothing to do with biology.
But doesn't code have to have a coder?
No, of course it doesn't. Code arises spontaneously at the origin of life. Something very, very simple, probably, at the origin of life, which was not genetic, not DNA at least. It would have been some kind of genetic, some kind of coding, which would be a self-replicating molecule. Once you get a self-replicating molecule, then you have the possibility of mutation, which is the mistake in coding.
But where does that come from?
You were about to say something?
Yeah, where does it come from?
It comes from a random accident in chemistry at some time around 3.8 to 4 billion years ago.
And what? Okay, but what? I don't want to labour this point, but I'm genuinely fascinated. Genuinely.
Okay.
So it happened 4 billion years ago. There was this chemical thing, whatever. But what was there before the chemical thing?
Oh well, there was chemistry. There was plenty going on before then, because we've got about 11 billion years, 10 million years to play with there, so there was plenty going on. What happened 4 billion years ago was a spontaneous, accidental arising of a molecule which made copies of itself. That was a very improbable event, admittedly, a very improbable event. But once it happened, then everything about biology was able to take over.
But you're making a number of informed assumptions based on what you believe happened. But you do concede that you don't know what happened before all that, because your brain, like mine, cannot compute that. So do you accept that stuff could have gone on before that, which makes everything you're saying completely wrong?
You're talking about two different kinds of before. You're talking about the origin of the universe, and now we're talking about the origin of life.
Well, I'm
the
just saying, if you go back generally billions of years, none of us were there, right? Everyone's got their view about what may or may not have happened. But do you accept that the way that your brain has computed what is likely to have happened to get us to where we are today, it could be based on a false original pretext?
I accepted that for the origin of the universe, which is another matter. Now we're talking about the origin of life. And again, we don't know how that happened, but there's nothing like so mysterious as the origin of the universe. The origin of life is a tractable problem. It may never be solved, but it's not in the same league as the origin of the universe. Now, the origin of life is something which chemists are working on, and they may solve it in a certain sense. They may find a suitable model, a plausible model, of how a self-replicating molecule came into existence. There's no mystery about there being chemistry before then. There was chemistry before then. There was plenty of organic chemistry going on. Now, somewhere around 4 billion years ago, a molecule arose which had the unusual property, not totally impossible, but unusual property, of making copies of itself. Now, once that happened, then you have the possibility of Darwinian life getting going. And that's something which we understand. And we understand in principle the kind of thing that could have given rise to that first self-replicating molecule. And it's an active field of research, but it's not a field that is necessarily going to yield results, because it happened a long time ago under conditions that we can't repeat now. But that's not a big mystery like the origin of the universe.
But are they not? Okay, but are they? I hear what you say, but are they not directly connected? In the sense, if you don't understand or know how the universe began or what was there before then can you really fully understand the origin of life? I mean, you can have some clues about what may have ignited life.
Not really. No, they're not really connected, because the origin of the universe is a mystery. But we know that it did originate, and so it was going for 10 billion years before life started.
But how do we know? How do we know the origin of the universe did happen the way you think? How do we know it originated?
We know that it's 13.8 billion years old because of various things which astronomers can tell you. I mean, Hubble's law and extrapolating backwards, all sorts of things like that, which are very well known and very well understood, but not the moment of the Big Bang itself. But once you've got that, then physicists know a lot. But we're not talking about that. I'm talking now about
I get it.
You are talking now about the origin of life.
I understand there are two different things in your head, but I'm saying that the two can't be completely disconnected, because clearly your belief is that the Big Bang happened, the universe was created, and then many billions of years later we have the origin of life. I get that. But my point to you is the two must be directly linked. You can't have origin of life without origin of the universe. And my problem with all this is I don't think people really... Well, can you? Can you have the two things separate?
Of course not. They're linked by 10 billion years of happenings, and we know,
Right.
we understand about that. The galaxies formed, the stars formed, chemistry formed.
Right. So how can you fully understand the origin of life?
Formed.
Right. So how do you fully understand the origin of life without fully understanding, because we don't know, the origin of the universe?
Well, you don't understand anything on that argument if you don't understand the origin of the universe. The origin of the universe is another matter. Once you've got the origin of the universe, then you've got a whole lot of things that happen, which we know very well. That's history. We understand that. We know that. That's well worked out. And then the origin of life is something that happened about 10 billion years after the origin of the universe. And that's something which is still a mystery, but a rather small mystery compared to the origin of the universe. And it's something which is being worked on. And once that happened, we then got the whole 4 billion years of life, and that we understand much better, and that happens to be my field.
Okay. I'm curious about your position about religion, because you went on Rachel Johnson's LBC programme earlier this year, and you said this.
I do think that we are culturally a Christian country. I call myself a cultural Christian. I'm not a believer, but there's a distinction between being a believing Christian and being a cultural Christian. And so, you know, I love hymns and Christmas carols, and I sort of feel at home in the Christian ethos. I feel that we are a Christian country in that sense.
And many people thought that was a very incongruous thing to say, because many would argue that your influence has been anti-Christianity, in the sense of you don't believe in religion, you don't believe in a God, you will have deterred people who listen to you and believe you from wanting to follow a God, a Christianity. Therefore, it's sort of antithetical to have the two positions. What do you say to that?
I am a cultural Christian who is against Christianity. That's nothing contradictory about that. I'm a cultural Christian in the sense that I know the Bible, I know hymns, I know carols, I like cathedrals, I like cathedral choirs, I've sung in that kind of choir. So I am a cultural Christian, but I'm against Christianity.